Pesach, I've done like a little Jeopardy board, and I get it out, and we do like Jeopardy questions. But I decided this year to do something a little bit different because I'm not sure how many of you have seen the website thetorah.com before I come across it. The Torah.com for the first time this year put out what I would call a series of scholarly article supplements that interest rabbis and not other people. But what I found was interesting is that you'd think that a website called the Torah.com would be a very religious website. What's funny about it is actually a site for biblical archaeologists who are trying to make sense of the Torah, stories they see in the Torah, and not only that, but things related to specifically Pesach this year. So I want to call on us today, all of us, a little bit to be amateur archaeologists. I want to read this text together, and I want to see if we can make meaning or try to figure out what this story is really all about. But first, before I show you this text from the Elephantine Papyri, I want to give you all a little bit of context, and here's what it is. The first temple was destroyed in what year? 586 before the Common Era. We all know that there was this depressing moment where we sang, "By the rivers of Babylon, we sat, we wept for Zion." Does anyone know where the Torah ends? What story is the end of the Torah? I think I did this for Shavuot one year. I said, y'all know where it begins, but do you know where it ends? The end of the Torah, or I should say of the Tanakh, sorry, more broadly, not Torah, the Tanakh, more broadly, are the Jews returning to Eretz Yisrael to basically reconstruct a smaller version of the temple, right, under somebody named Zerubbabel, so to speak, right? And the person who leads them there, the three sort of leaders are Daniel, you're welcome, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Okay, Daniel is a high-ranking officer in the Persian court. By the way, that is the major turn of events in Jewish history that has allowed this shift to take place. The Babylonians are conquered by the Persians, and the Persians have a different policy regarding religious settlement than the Babylonians. The Babylonians' policy was to make people as miserable as possible, ship them away from their homelands, make them suffer. The Persians was a policy of religious tolerance, where they said, listen, as long as you pay your taxes, as long as you're good citizens, you can go back to your ancestral homelands and just don't revolt against us. And so Daniel, who's a high-ranking official in the Persian government, so to speak, goes to the king. The king says, no problem. Ezra comes back at that time with a book that no one's ever heard of before. It's called Torah of Moses, the Torah of Moses. He essentially establishes that of the law of the land. He's the religious leader. Nehemiah is the spiritual leader, and he sets back rebuilding the walls of the city and fortifying Jerusalem to bring it back to its greatness. So that's where we come up with this story, the Elephantine Papyri. The Elephantine Papyri, which have been known about for some time, began around the year 525 of the BCE. To answer the question that Zev asked me the other day, Dad, why don't we say BC? And why don't we say AD? BC, of course, for those of you who know, is Jews before the Common Era. And the Common Era, not before Christ and Antonio Domini, right, the year of our Lord. But essentially what happens and what takes us to this particular story is that Darius II, who is, of course, follows Darius the First and other rulers and Cyrus like him, recruits a Jewish regiment. One of the conditions of Jews going back to their homeland is that they had to participate in the armed forces, so to speak, of the Persian Empire. It wasn't so simple as religious tolerance and taxes. They had to do other things. And so before we know it, there is a Jewish garrison that is stationed in a town in Egypt called Elephantine. Okay? And we actually have quite a bit of information about this particular garrison. We know they built a little temple of their own and did their own ritual sacrifices there because it was a little bit far to get back to Israel. And we know, of course, that there are many of these garrison towns throughout that era that ultimately end up as major cities. Another garrison town throughout the Middle East that becomes a major city has the name Baghdad. Right? Baghdad starts as a major garrison town. Soldiers are stationed there. Well, if soldiers are there, you got to have food. You got to have entertainment. You got to have all sorts of manners of things. And so those little towns turn into cities. And what we have here is a note from Jedaniah and the Judean soldiers, or to the Jedaniah and the Jewish soldiers of the Jewish garrison, sent from Hananiah, we don't know who this Hananiah was, informing them of what King Darius II in his 5th year sent as a command, blah, 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 from Arsamas, the governor of Egypt. Okay? We'd like to read this interesting papyri, by the way. We have records of these papyrus as a document going back to 525 of before the Common Era. This document is roughly dated to 419 of before the Common Era. Would someone like to read? And then we can discuss the significance after. Al, you're nodding. Go for it.
All right. So, now, do you count...
Start from the... Yes, now. Yes, go ahead.
Do you count... do you count 14 days in Nisan, and on the 14th at twilight observe the Passover, and from the 15th day until the 21st day of Nisan, the festival of unleavened bread, observe. 7 days eat unleavened bread. Now be pure and take heed.
And why don't you finish this up? It's not that long of a document to read. Go ahead.
And do not...
Yes, and by the brackets are like there's pieces missing, but people have filled in sort of the blanks.
So we think it's do not drink.
Do not work, yeah.
Do not drink anything of leaven, and do not...
Oh, you skipped a line. Do not work on the 15th day and on the 21st day. Okay, go ahead. Keep going. Go back to where you were, the 3rd section. And do not drink anything of leaven.
On the 21st day. Got it. I skipped a section. Yeah, okay, so now the 3rd section?
Yes, 3rd section.
And do not drink anything of leaven, and do not eat anything of leaven, nor let it be seen in your houses from the 14th day of Nisan at sunset until the 21st day of Nisan at sunset. And bring into your chambers any leaven which you have in your houses, and seal it up during these days.
I'm curious how many of you realize how remarkable a document this really is, for a variety of reasons. But let's be archaeologists for just a moment, okay? Amateur archaeologists. We are looking at a document that, by the way, was only recently discovered among the papyri. This is pretty new as far as its task here. What are we looking at? There's 3 possibilities of what we may be looking at according to biblical archaeologists. And let's see if we can figure this out together. What is this? What? So that is one possibility we'll talk about. Not the origins of Pesach, but there is one particular archaeologist, I'm going to quote his name, Michael Satlow, who argues, as also a professor of Jewish studies, that what you have in the Torah is both a Chag HaMatzot and also, on the other hand, Chag HaPesach. And once upon a time, these may have been 2 different holidays. And so his possibility is that this is the combination of those holidays. And that this could be that Hananiah, who's a high-ranking, let's say, Persian official, is saying, hey, you guys who aren't in the mainstream, who are out in this garrison out in the middle of nowhere, in Elephantine in Egypt, here's the new holiday, and this is how we're going to do it. By the way, how many days is the holiday?
By the way, it's 7 days.
There you go, 7 days, right?
And 5 of the 7 are full of labor.
That's right. Now, again, why is that the case, though? This predates the rabbis by almost 500-600 years. Think about that, right? This is from 425 before the Common Era. The Mishnah isn't published until 200 of the Common Era. So yes, in its original inception, you do have, in this diaspora community, if you will, on the verge of Israel and Egypt. I was waiting for someone to point that out, and I'm not surprised as you pointed it out first, right? 7 days. We have a 7-day holiday. So it could be that its original inception, pre-rabbinic, so the rabbis are not establishing anything about 8-day Yom Tov, right? Or 8 days of the holiday. We have a 7-day Pesach, and the first day and the last day are Yom Tov, according to this. But there's more to it, I think, than that. But yes, that is a possibility. So possibility number 1, according to Michael Satlow, is they're building the holiday. Right? They're taking these 2 holidays and they're essentially combining them into one. What's the second possibility? Okay, this one is a little bit harder to ascertain. And this is from Idan Dershowitz, because there are other documents in the papyri who say it could be that this is also part of Darius's attempt to build a calendar. And Allison, you kind of hit on that a little bit as well. So it's not just the establishing of a holiday, but it's specifically establishing a calendar. We know from another document in the papyrus collection that Darius asks the Jews in Elephantine a little bit later to declare a leap year. Okay? Because again, the Jewish calendar is still in formation at this very point. P.S. What is the Jewish name of the Jewish month according to the Torah when Pesach is celebrated? It could be Chodesh HaRishon, it's the first month, or
Nisan.
Chodesh HaAviv. Chodesh HaAviv, if you read carefully in different parts, right? It is Nisan as well in other parts, but it could be, again, that this is all about establishing the calendar and saying, listen, you may have this, as Ron said, the first month, but for us, this is Chodesh Nisan. This is the Persian name of the month, and therefore, we're putting this calendar away. Again, I want to put out there, by the way, these are probably two of the more far-fetched interpretations, and there probably is a third, much more simpler explanation for what is going on, which I think speaks to us today in the world we live in and the reason that I brought it. But those are two very plausible explanations. All right, amateur archaeologists, what's our third possibility here this morning? Informing them of what? And what do they get to do? Take off Yom Tov. Right? Think about that. How many of us struggle today in the workplace taking off for Yom Tov? Okay? And what is basically being told here? This is an order from the government giving Jewish soldiers not only permission to take off for the holiday on the first and the last day, which goes to show they struggle with the same things we do, right, in our day today, but also saying you have the right to observe the holiday the way you want. Okay? I hear stories from my grandfather about when he served in the American Army, how hard it was to get kosher food sometimes, right? When he was stationed in El Paso, Texas. All right? And one of his favorite, loves to tell the story about his day of discharge from the Army when he drove back in his convertible with a hunk of kosher salami in a newspaper, right? He was so excited making his way back from his time in the Army. But what you really have here is an illustration of King Darius's policy of not only religious tolerance, but religious enforcements. What is he essentially saying? Jewish garrison, you don't have to work the first day and last day of the holiday. And what else? You have permission to observe your holiday in the traditional way that you do it. Only eat matzah on those days. What else does he say? Don't work on the first 2 days, right? And take all of the leaven you have in your chambers and move it to the side. Now, one other interesting possibility, that may be that there were Jews who observed Pesach and Jews who didn't observe Pesach in that time period. And so what is he essentially saying here? Observe it. You're observing it as a Jewish garrison. Or even though you may be out of the land of Israel, you have to do what I like to call the frommest common denominator. If there are people there who observe it, observe the holiday, get rid of your chametz, and observe it for those 8 days. Or 7 days. And so I think this last explanation, which I think is really the most plausible, speaks to something that is a challenge in our world today, and it's pretty remarkable to think about. And that is for 2,600 years ago, Jews who were living outside of the land of Israel were struggling or trying to find a way to observe their holiday in the best way that they could. And thank God, right? With permission from the government, they were able to do that. And I think if they were able to do it, God willing, I know I'm preaching to my crowd on the seventh day here, so can we, right? The best we can, because they fought to do it, and so can we today. And I think that's very cool to think that we are part of that 2,600-year line of tradition of Jews who are struggling with the same issues now that they were then. Chag Sameach. And yes, it was 7 days. Before the rabbis. Any questions? I should have Judith before we finish. Yeah.
Do you think, this is sort of related, do you think that the conservative people ever knock off the extra holidays?
That's a good question. I don't know. The question for those of you at home was, by Judith, is do you think that the conservative movement will eventually knock off that extra day of the holiday? Yes, but it's too soon to tell.
How big soon?
I think...
You can eat kidney now, so.
yeah, you can eat ketniyot, right?
Yeah, because it's such a tradition, it feels like
I'll tell you what I do in my house with kitniyot, because I think it's absurd. Total tangent here. In my house, I let my kids eat kitniyot, and I don't eat kitniyot. Because for me, it's a sin, but I'm like, you know what? Let them grow up with it being normal so they don't have this nourishkeit that I'm dealing with, right? Because I grew up not doing it. But let my kids think it's normal, so it'll be okay. Basically, it's like, we'll do peanut butter bamba. That's when I eat my kitniyot in my house. Anyway.
Years ago,
Yeah.
I was in the Kroger over in Sandy Springs.
Yeah.
And they had, the peanut bamba that was kosher for Passover. And I took it into my car because I always let my kids eat peanut butter even beforehand on Passover. was like, you can't eat that on Passover. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because you're not Sephardic. And I'm thinking to myself, hey,
How do you know?
you know I'm not Sephardic. And it's none of your business what I let my kids eat. So,
Wow.
Well, now they make cashew,
Anyway, to be continued.
Another interesting point.
Yes, as we're jumping, go ahead.
What are they supposed to do with their leaven?
Well, so what does it say? Yes, thank you. So what do you do? You seal it up. It's like
Seal it up.
just like we do in our garages and our basements, right? We
sell
roll
it.
it up. We sell it, right? We sell it, correct?
They don't say they're selling it. They just say, put it in a box.
Put it in a box. Put it away. Listen, they were nothing but pragmatists in the time they lived in. What can I say? It was the Jewish garrison, so they were all Jews serving. By the way, they were all saving the same unit together, right? Much like there would be Jewish garrisons, interestingly, in the times of the Ottomans and everybody else. It's fascinating to see that existing back then too. All right. Yashikach. Interesting way to get to the end of Pesach.